So, welcome to our course, Should I Invest in Real Estate? A practical introduction to the basics, leverage, meaning debt, taxes, and of course, the risks involved. This will be the fairly brief trailer, which will provide an overview of where we're going to go with this, what you can expect to get out of it, and help you decide whether you'd like to consider joining us on this little adventure. Quite a lot to know here. The main question, of course, is this the best way to invest your energy, brains, rationality, stability, and of course money, compared to realistic alternatives available to you, which we will discuss in some detail, particularly stocks, bonds, chain letters perhaps, and also how to avoid rookie mistakes. Having been in this game quite a long time, I've certainly seen a lot of dreadful mistakes that people have made and end up hurting them and their families quite a bit. There are some mistakes. We do not have any secret formulas here for doing 30 deals in 60 days. We might have, in fact, the opposite advice. But if owning something like this is in your future or your interest, or perhaps something even like this, combined residential and commercial, the question is, what do you need to get it and what do you need to keep them? Let's go fill in the arrows here to see how we're going to proceed down these 12 lessons. First, we're going to start with looking at where you are at and what you can handle now. Very important question. That doesn't take very long to go into. Then we should look at some investment options, partly because I used to be an econ prof in my very first life. It's always important to be asking, is what we're doing the best way to use our resources compared to other available alternatives, such as stocks, of course, and bonds and other exotic things. We'll touch on that briefly because as we go through these 12 lessons, we always want to be asking, would stocks be better than this? Or what about commodities or options of some kind? Just to be honest. But what does an ideal real estate investment look like? You've heard probably for years that real estate is such a great investment. What does that really mean? In particular, what are the drawbacks here? How can you get stung badly? And what are the key advantages that cause people to get into this game seemingly so often? Even going down this particular avenue, there's a variety of ways you can approach the whole property game, and we'll go into these in considerable detail, including, of course, how to structure deals in a wide variety of ways. But if you're in this game, you might end up owning property at some point and therefore knowing quite a bit about the details and legalities of property management will be very, very valuable. And we'll go into that for at least one whole lesson. Then we should ask ourselves, what about going into bigger and hopefully better things? Apartments, office buildings, and so on. There's a nice little office complex, brand new. Notice the space for lease sign there. Quite risky if you have vacancies and such a thing. Here's a charming, larger, multi-unit apartment building. And here's a nice-looking Class A office building. We might want to consider how we would consider going into those things. Then finally, we should talk about death and taxes, how to get out alive without giving it all away to taxes or making other serious mistakes as you think about, quotes, retiring or errors after you die, that sort of thing. It's worth going into that just a little bit now so that when you start this game, if you're going to start it at all, or even if you're in it a little bit, you can have the end in mind as you work backwards so that when you make decisions today, you can cast them in a reasonably long-term context. Death and taxes, yes. We want to avoid death by taxes here. My background to this topic is a little different than most others, I think. I did start life as an assistant professor of economics at Ohio Wesleyan and Miami University of Ohio. Taught a lot of different courses there, very fun, nice students, quite interesting. Later became a CPA, did a lot of interesting financial things, became a bank vice president, did a lot of stuff there. I'm something of an authority on public utility pricing, a very interesting topic. I was responsible for developing major investment packages for very, very large public sector organizations. And I've done a lot of these things in Canada, the US, and Europe. As a result, my perspective on business things in general is fairly broad. But in addition, over at least the last 25 years, I've been involved with real estate projects. Of course, both owning and managing them. So I do have considerable perspective on the practicalities involved from both an almost academic and finance point of view, but from a very, very hands-on perspective as well. As a result, it's quite painful to see the get-rich-quick seminars that are offered everywhere for $700 a weekend, because people get involved with these things, get in over their head, and start making mistakes. And my goal here is to help us avoid making uninformed decisions. In fact, you may end up being talked out of going into real estate altogether after these lessons if you follow all the way through. On the other hand, you may get really excited, but we just want you to make informed decisions. Of course, compared to your realistic alternatives, not alternatives facing Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. Who's the audience here? Well, of course, it's established, responsible adults interested in cash flow, wealth gain, possible retirement income, and asking the question, how practical is real estate as a vehicle to achieve these goals? And in particular, how can things go wrong? What could I lose? Could I lose everything if I gamble in this area, or only lose a little? But also included in the audiences here is possible young adults who may be a little bit overconfident if they're making way too much money at Amazon or at Silicon Valley somewhere, and are thinking about property as a side light that might be interesting. Likewise, students wanting to get much more savvy about business things and reality in general could be interested in this. Of course, their parents might have a urge to push younger folks along the maturity scale by looking into a lot of this material. We're going to talk about property investments, but that's going to involve insurance, taxes, investment analysis of various kinds, and quite a lot of general business issues here. Very, very practical, though. Of course, we have no time for the more theoretical things here. College and high school classes might be a environment for this kind of thing. Yes, a graduation present from college for liberal arts majors, or even high school for with it youngsters, might be appropriate in many cases. Real estate agents are another group that might find this very interesting. I used to be licensed as a real estate agent, but of course that training and licensing procedure is quite different than what we're going to be doing. And I dare say that agents who go through this material will know quite a bit more than their peers, other things equal, especially about taxes and investment analyses. And they'll be better able to understand their investor clients in particular. Of course, escrow and back office personnel might be benefiting enormously, if I might suggest, from this whole thing. Somewhat involved though it is. If I owned an escrow company, I'd want all my employees to understand this material real comfortably. And if you were in such a role, you might find it interesting to take this class and take the little test we have, get the little certificate, and show your boss that, gee, here's the enumeration of some of the things that I passed this somewhat detailed test about. I think they'll be impressed. And of course, the for sale by owner folks will probably find it very, very valuable to save a lot of trouble and hassle and heartache and money by working through these lessons and carefully then proceeding with the for sale by owner if they want to give that a try, which I, in many cases, could highly recommend. Not all, by any means. Okay. A few things we might talk about here, that we're for sure going to talk about. One is that you can, in some cases, sell what you don't own. That's not illegal, but at closing, just as an example of the things we're going to be discussing, if you can find a third party who's interested in buying some shrubs or trees that the property has, or maybe timber, or maybe a subdividable lot, that's always a good one. How about exotic appliances? You can sell those to a third party at closing while you're buying the property itself, and therefore you need far less down payment in some cases. Most buyers don't know this, of course, but that's, I guess, to our advantage. Likewise, we're going to talk about how to remove tenants, a very delicate area, fraught with legal and emotional potential for trouble. Of course, it matters whether on a month-to-month or on a current lease. I try to never do a lease for more than 1.5 years, but in a very important area, you got to know about this if you're going to consider the property game. In addition, we're going to talk about how do you analyze alternative investments, say an apartment building versus, for example, a restaurant. How would let's call it professional analysts and investors look at these two alternatives and decide which is the better choice, other things equal? This involves basic finance concepts that you really should know quite a bit about and be comfortable with if you're going to even remotely get into this game, let alone other investment type of alternatives. Oops, then there's the tax aspect. This graph is not as bad as it looks. We'll build it up bit by bit here and show how, if you're careful and think in advance, you can buy and sell a lot of properties and avoid paying the taxes on them, on the gains, until very much at the end of your investment career, and maybe then still avoid the taxes even when you die. Not to think too far ahead here. Very important concept to understand carefully, and there's a few details, but it's not as bad as it looks. Believe me, you'll find it quite interesting. I am reasonably confident. There's no prerequisites for taking this class. I used to teach a lot of classes that you needed to know the basics of calculus just to get in, but that's not the case here. We want to keep it pretty fluid. None of that stuff, although it can be helpful and it's fun to talk about it in those ways, but that would just take us astray. There are 12 main lessons, about 30, sometimes 40 minutes. If I really get excited, it sometimes goes a little longer. It's all so darn interesting. Some lessons have several sections, A, B, and C, just to break it up a little bit. But we can put on the music, indicate when it's time to go get an iced tea and take a break, hit the button. You can come back at your convenience. Some lessons are longer than others, but of course, it's all so darn interesting. If you feel overwhelmed, just stop and take a deep breath. There's quite a bit of material here, but it's worth chewing on, if I might say. It's all online, and there's no travel to expensive hotels in Austin, Texas, or Boston, or Vancouver, BC, or someplace. I used to have to go to Europe on business all the time, and I must say I'm very glad I'm not doing that anymore, so I'm very sympathetic to the travel thing. There are no required tests or term papers. I almost miss the days long, long ago when I was reading a lot of term papers. It can be quite interesting, but while there's no required tests, I will suggest from time to time just readings on the side that you might find quite interesting and valuable toward expanding, let's call it, your business sophistication, things that you just know about. If you're going to work with other people in the investing game in any way whatsoever, it's just good to be literate about a lot of basic things that probably your colleagues, bosses, etc. will know about, and you should know about. We do offer an optional certificate connected to this class. It's a fairly demanding test that takes several hours and requires Excel, but if you pass it, you can get a little certificate, and what's involved with the test is explained on the website. We'll call it Real Estate Investment Analysis, this course, an introduction to the risk management, valuation, and tax aspects. That'll sound duly lofty, so that you can then show your certificate to your potential investor partners, maybe, to colleagues at work, if you're in the escrow game, or even a real estate agent, or many other things, or to your managers. Now, what's included in this course and the questions that help evaluate whether you really understood this stuff carefully is explained in the website for this class. Yes, we're going to talk about management, negotiation, taxes, finance, valuation, and the summary of this material can be seen on the website under the menu item certificate, and you can show somebody the certificate and what it covered. And frankly, they'll be pretty impressed. So, another dimension of this course, you could treat it as I like to call it a liberal arts rescue, having had a son who just recently graduated as a philosophy major. If you are a non-business major, maybe geology, maybe engineering, something, and you'd like to think it's time to learn much more about practical business things, you can treat this as a little bit of a resume stocking stuffer. If you work through these 12 hours of material, you will actually learn quite a bit about basic business things in addition to property investing. and again, a possible birthday or Christmas gift. When we get to the end, we'll talk about, I can't really provide office hours like I did when I was in the professoring game, but we can maybe work up some consulting things if you have issues that are important and are frankly interesting. We might be able to work out some arrangement to explore some issues you might have. But let's talk about that at the end of lesson 12, once you understand where we're going here, what you've covered, not covered, where you're at by the end of all this. Yes, we might sit around the table and chat interestingly about a variety of issues. Okay. Hopefully, as a result of all this, you will better understand the realities of going down the property investment avenue, and you may decide not to do it, which would be great. Now's the time to decide that. Maybe you've already started. You got a couple of houses, and you're having trouble with them, or you just think it's a pain with those toilet problems at 2 in the morning on Friday morning. And, the sooner you can decide you don't want to do this, of course, the better. But got to know about it to decide about it. You might want to stick with a simple Vanguard S&P 500 stock index fund. But you'll get a variety of insights from this class, and any one of which, or small collection of which, will be more than worth the certainly dollar, but also more importantly the time investment you're going to make in this, because it's going to take you a little bit of time to work through this stuff. Although you can do it on the bus, going into work, on your tablet or even phone, certainly on the laptop, and since it's all internet based. And if you in fact just decide to watch a little less Dancing with the Stars, you'd be surprised how much time you have and how low the opportunity cost can be of investing in these few hours here. But I watch Dancing with the Stars, I have to embarrassingly admit, from time to time too. It can be quite entertaining. So, to wrap up, the eager person, as we well know, learns from the bumps and grinds of a painful experience. And that's definitely a teacher. It's a tough one, though, because it gives its test first and its lesson afterward. However, the wiser person learns from the experience of others. And here you have a chance to do a heck of a lot of that, based on my partly academic and partly somewhat international, pretty broad business background. You can maybe pick up a few pointers here and there. So, if you'd like to join the club here and dive in, we'll have a little fun, learn quite a bit, and trot right along. See you perhaps in lesson 1. Thanks a lot. Bye.